The story begins with spinal surgeon Jack Shepherd waking up disoriented and lying on his back in a dense bamboo grove. He stumbles through the grove, passing a white tennis shoe hanging from a tree. Jack emerges onto a pristine beach and discovers the wreckage of Oceanic Flight 815. He makes his way towards the smoking crash site, where survivors are in chaos. Charlie Pace, a former bassist and songwriter, stands dazed near a still-running jet engine. Jin Soo Kwon, a Korean gang member, cries out for his wife, while Michael Dawson, a former construction worker, shouts for his son, Walt. Nearby, Shannon Rutherford screams hysterically under the plane's precariously dangling wing. Jack, with the help of John Locke and 2 other men, rescues a passenger trapped under a detached landing wheel and applies a tourniquet to a severe leg injury. He then sees Claire Littleton, an 8-month pregnant woman, crying for help and instructs Locke to keep others away from the engine. As Jack approaches Claire, a survivor is pulled into the engine, causing a violent explosion. After shielding Claire from the blast, Jack instructs her to stay still and tells Hurley Reyes, an overweight man, to move her away from the fumes and to call if her condition worsens. Jack then corrects Boone's incorrect mouth-to-mouth resuscitation on Rose. Eventually, Rose starts breathing again thanks to Jack's persistent efforts. Jack notices Hugo and Claire sitting under the unstable plane wing, dashes to them, and they narrowly escape as the wing collapses and explodes. A piece of the plane's engine narrowly misses Charlie. Later, Jack finds a sewing kit in the wreckage and moves to a secluded area to treat a large gash on his lower back. He sees Kate Austen, a fugitive, emerging from the jungle and asks her to stitch his wound, as he can't reach it himself. Reluctantly, she cleans her hands with Jack's vodka while he washes the wound and calms her with a story about his first solo surgical procedure. That evening, Sawyer smokes a cigarette grimly while surveying the wreckage, Claire gazes out to sea, and Locke sits on the beach. Hurley salvages some meals from the plane's galley, while Sayid enlists Charlie to keep the fire burning brightly for visibility. Rose tearfully kisses her wedding ring. As night falls, Sayid expresses frustration at their lack of rescue, while Shannon rejects a chocolate Apollo bar from Boone, saying she'll eat on the rescue boat. Hurley distributes the meals he salvaged, giving 2 to Claire. Michael cares for his son, while Jin instructs his wife, son, to stay with him and disregard the other survivors. Elsewhere, Jack treats an unconscious Edward Mars, who is severely injured by shrapnel. Kate asks Jack if he believes Mars will survive and reveals that she was seated next to him on the flight. They discuss the crash and speculate about the location of the missing cockpit and tail, with Jack suggesting that a transceiver in the cockpit might be used to send a distress signal. As darkness falls, the tranquility of the night is shattered by ominous mechanical noises and the sound of crashing trees from the jungle. The survivors gather together fearfully and look toward the noises. The next day, as some of the survivors discuss the strange jungle noises of the night before, Kate and Jack prepare to search for the cockpit and its transceiver. Kate takes walking shoes from a dead body and looks up to see Locke watching her. He smiles, revealing an orange peel obscuring his teeth. Following this, Jack leaves Boone in charge of the wounded, including Edward Mars. Charlie pushes himself into the search group, and they set off to follow Kate's descriptions of the location of smoke she saw the previous day. Kate tells Charlie he looks familiar. He reveals that he is the bassist in the band Drive Shaft. Unbeknownst to them, Vincent watches the trio from the bushes. As evening approaches, a tropical rainstorm drenches the survivors. Only Locke remains uncovered as he welcomes the rain with open arms. Unfortunately, the terrifying noises and movement in the jungle are observed again by Claire and Rose. Elsewhere, the trio find the nose section of the plane, which is suspended at a steep angle in trees. Led by Jack, they climb into the nose and scale the slanted floor, where Jack pries open the cockpit door and a body falls through the door. Inside, they find the pilot of Oceanic Flight 815, unconscious and still in his seat. He suddenly awakens and coughs. The pilot then tells Jack and Kate that the plane had lost radio contact before the crash and changed course towards Fiji. In his guess, they were 1,000 miles off course and the rescue team are looking for them in the wrong place. Shortly afterwards, he locates the plane's transceiver, but can't get it to work. Meanwhile, Jack and Kate notice that Charlie is missing. As Kate calls for him, he guiltily emerges from the bathroom. Suddenly, loud noises and the mechanical thrashing heard by the survivors on the beach fill the air. The pilot attempts to investigate by cautiously peering out of a broken cockpit window. To the horror of the search party, the pilot is seized by something unseen and pulled through the window. A large splatter of blood splashes on the cockpit window as he disappears. Jack grabs the transceiver as he and Kate exit the cockpit in terror. As the three run from the monster, Charlie trips. Jack runs back to him to free his leg and becomes separated from the group. Kate continues running but stops and draws herself under the trailing roots of a banyan tree. She calms herself by counting to 5, a method that she and Jack had discussed while stitching the latter's wound. A few minutes later, Charlie runs into Kate and the two begin searching for Jack. Kate finds the pilot's badge in the mud beneath a tree, and she and Charlie look up and spot his bloodied body suspended in the treetops. Fortunately, Jack steps out of hiding, saying that he dodged the monster. Looking up, Charlie wonders what could have possibly done that to the pilot. In a flashback to before the crash, Charlie sits in his seat on Oceanic Flight 815, grimacing, sweating, and impatiently tapping his ring on his armrest. Cindy Chandler, a flight attendant, approaches him warily, asking him if he is okay. Trying to act calm, he politely tells her he's fine but becomes brusque when she presses him. She goes to the back of the plane and whispers to the other attendants about his behavior. Charlie becomes paranoid, glancing back repeatedly until he sees several flight attendants walking towards him. He flees his seat and rushes to the restroom, brushing past Jack and Rose and stepping over Boone and Shannon. The flight attendants pursue, but the captain turns on the "fasten seatbelts" sign, so Cindy stops her pursuit and alerts the passengers to fasten their seatbelts. Charlie finds a vacant restroom after several unsuccessful attempts. Once inside, he locks the door and removes his shoe, from which he takes a small bag of heroin. As soon as he ingests the heroin, a flight attendant knocks on the door and demands he come out. Charlie attempts to stall the attendant and drops his bag of heroin into the toilet. As his finger rests on the handle, about to flush the toilet, the plane experiences severe turbulence, slamming him into the ceiling of the bathroom. After escaping the bathroom, he is nearly hit by a refreshment cart. Frightened, he rushes to a seat several rows back and straps himself in as the plane crashes. On the same Oceanic Flight 815, Kate sits next to Edward Mars, a United States Marshal. A flight attendant offers her more juice, but she declines while Mars asks the attendant for a black coffee. After the attendant leaves, Mars begins taunting Kate, sarcastically telling her to remain optimistic that someone might believe her story. Kate sips on her juice, and it is revealed that she is wearing handcuffs. The plane begins experiencing some slight turbulence, and Kate tells Mars that she has one favor to ask of him. Mars is interested to hear what her favor is, but before she can elaborate, the plane's turbulence worsens, causing several people to be flung into the plane's ceiling. Luggage falls and strikes Mars in the head, and he begins bleeding profusely and falls unconscious. Oxygen masks fall, and Kate attempts to grab hers, but she cannot reach it because of her handcuffs. She then reaches into Mars' pocket for the key to her handcuffs. She unlocks the handcuffs, straps a mask on herself, and after some deliberation, straps a mask on Mars as well. She then sits back in panic as the plane's tail is ripped from the rest of the plane. In the present day, after the journey to the cockpit, Jack, Kate, and Charlie trek back across the island to the beach. Jack tries the transceiver while Charlie pesters him about whether it works. Kate then asks Charlie what he was doing in the restroom of the plane while she and Jack found the pilot. A visibly red Charlie replies that he was puking from the sight of the corpses. He further adds that he is a coward, something that Kate reassures him he is not. However, Charlie's dark expression indicates that he believes otherwise. At the seashore, Walt, holding Vincent's leash, calls for his dog quietly. He notices something on the ground and reaches down to pick it up. It is a pair of handcuffs. His stepfather Michael suddenly appears, berating Walt for wandering from the beach, though Walt thought that the small grove was close enough to the beach. But Michael asserts his authority over Walt before noticing the pair of handcuffs. Walt tells the anxious Michael that he found the handcuffs on the ground nearby. Michael, visibly nervous, leads his stepson back to the beach while glancing around fearfully. A short while later, Sayid and Sawyer are brawling on the beach. Jack, arriving back from the jungle, rushes to separate the two, as does Michael. Sawyer, who had been informed by Michael about the handcuffs, immediately suspected that Sayid, a Middle Easterner, was responsible for crashing the plane. Sawyer mentions that the guy sitting next to Sayid did not survive the crash, and also that Sayid was pulled out of line shortly before the plane was boarded. The fight is finally stopped by Kate, who changes the subject and asks if anyone can help repair the broken transceiver. Sayid volunteers to help, much to Sawyer's chagrin. Boone asks Jack if there were any survivors at the cockpit, and Jack, lying, says that there weren't. After bathing in the sea, Kate changes her clothes and approaches Sayid to check on the progress of the transceiver's repair. It seems fixed, but there is no reception, meaning it can't broadcast a message for rescue. Sayid explains that by heading up the mountains to higher ground, they might be able to acquire a signal. Kate visits Jack, who is struggling to save the life of Edward Mars from his shrapnel injuries. She tells him that she is going on a hike with Sayid, despite the fact that they both are aware of what lay waiting in the jungle. Kate is adamant, though, since the batteries on the transceiver won't last very long. Elsewhere, Charlie finds a private space and gets his heroin stash ready for a taste. The rest of the survivors are busy with different tasks. Shannon proclaims that she is going on the hike with Kate and Sayid. Upon hearing this, Charlie also signs up, as does Boone, grudgingly. Further away, Sawyer reads a letter that's been tucked away in his pocket that seems to trouble him for a moment. He notices Kate and the team heading out in the distance and joins them on their difficult trek up the mountain. Later, Kate's team argues about the right time to check the radio and risk completely wasting the battery. However, a roaring in the distance interrupts them. Kate realizes that it might be the same thing that killed the pilot. As the creature approaches, everyone runs, but Sawyer stands firm. In the last few moments, he pulls out a gun and fires almost a full clip of bullets. When the group returns, they discover that Sawyer has killed a polar bear. A suspicious Kate questions where Sawyer got the gun, and he reveals that a U.S. Marshal was on the plane, and he took the Marshal's badge as well as his gun. Sayid then suggests that Sawyer was the prisoner all along. Kate manages to take the gun while Sawyer's back is turned. She asks how to use it, causing Sawyer to grin. But Sayid instructs her on how to disassemble it. She then gives one part to each man, though Sawyer whispers to her that he knows her type, as she passes him the ammunition. On the beach, Hurley helps Jack tend to Mars, having found antibiotics from the plane. As Jack removes some shrapnel, Hurley faints at the sight of the blood. Then, as Jack stitches the wound, the pain causes Mars to regain consciousness. He grabs Jack's shirt, angrily asking, "Where is she?" As Kate and the group head out, Sayid tries the radio and hears a conflicting transmission, meaning that there is another signal already broadcasting from nearby. He manages to tap into a French transmission, and Shannon, the only French speaker in the group, attempts to translate. She hears a distress message from a woman saying, it killed them all. Sayid also calculates, from the counter on the message loop, that the message has been playing for approximately 16 years. The group realizes that if the message is still playing, the call for help was probably never answered. In a flashback scene, Kate is awakened by a farmer, who has discovered her sleeping in his sheep pen. She tells him that her name is Annie, and that she is a recent Canadian college graduate visiting Australia to see the world. The farmer, Ray Mullen, offers to let her stay for a while and do some work around the farm for which he will pay her, and Kate accepts. Almost 3 months later, Kate is still earning her wages working at the farm. One night, she states she was planning to give him a letter to say goodbye because she was bad at it. Ray asks her to stay one more night and in the morning he will give her a ride to the train station. The next morning, Kate and Ray ride silently to the train station in Ray's beat-up truck. Ray asks if she's hungry as he nervously looks in the rearview mirror at the black SUV behind him. Kate notices this and asks him what's going on. He reveals that he had known she was a fugitive for a few days since he saw her mugshot in the post office. He expresses his sincere apology for turning her in and claims it was a hard decision, but he needs the reward of $23,000 to pay his mortgage. Shortly after, the black SUV pulls up beside them, the window rolls down, and behind the wheel is Edward Mars, the marshal. Back in the present day, in a makeshift medical tent, Jack is tending to the critically wounded marshal, who mutters the same thing over and over through his pain, "Don't trust her. She's dangerous." When Jack asks him who she is, the marshal tells him to look in his jacket pocket. Reaching into his pocket, Jack pulls out a mugshot of Kate. The signal party of Sayid, Kate, Sawyer, Boone, Shannon, and Charlie are working their way back down the mountain. It's getting dark and some of the group wants to make camp for the night. Sawyer wants to continue through the jungle at night, but others in the party convince him otherwise. Sitting around the fire, they discuss what they should tell the beach camp about the distress signal they heard on the transceiver. They decide as a whole to not reveal what they heard, in order to keep the group's morale up. At the signal party's camp, Boone lifts the gun from Sawyer and the magazine from Sayid as they sleep. They wake and an argument ensues over who should have the gun, but they cannot agree on a trustworthy candidate, until they agree on Kate. She reluctantly agrees to keep it. The next day, Hurley comes to the medical tent to tell Jack that the signal party has returned. Before Jack can get to the group, Kate pulls him aside and says that she has something to say to him. She explains what was heard on the transceiver. He asks if there is anything else she would like to tell him. Kate asks if the marshal had regained consciousness while she was gone with the signal party. Jack lets her know that he did, but only briefly. Kate asks if he had said anything to Jack. Jack lies and says the marshal didn't say anything. While they talk, the marshal's condition takes a turn for the worse. Jack knows that without proper tools and stronger antibiotics, the marshal will not make it through the night. Hurley tells Jack that he's searched everywhere for more medicine, except the fuselage, but he'd rather not go in there. Jack enters the fuselage and picks his way around the corpses inside it. He hears some rustling behind him. It's Sawyer. He's going through the fuselage for things he could use, such as liquor and Playboy magazines. Jack berates him for disrespecting the dead and being self-absorbed, and Sawyer replies that they're no longer in civilization, they're in the wild. As Kate leans over the marshal's body, he regains consciousness and grabs her by the throat. Fortunately, Jack returns and pushes the marshal back to the ground. While Kate gasps for air, the marshal goes into shock. Seeing this, Jack gives him water as Kate denies provoking him in any way. She wants him to euthanize the marshal, but Jack refuses, saying that he saw her mug shot and he is not a murderer. Later, while Jack tries to treat the marshal in the tent, he tells Jack not to trust Kate, saying that she'll do anything to get away, and tells Jack he wants to talk to Kate alone. Jack responds by asking what Kate did, but the marshal refuses to tell him. When Kate enters the tent, the marshal asks Kate what the favor she asked him for on the plane was. Kate tells him she wants to make sure Ray gets his $23,000. The marshal laughs and tells Kate that she is one of a kind. He then asks if he is going to die. When Kate nods, he asks Kate to end his life and put an end to his suffering, a request which she accepts. The next day, Jack is sitting silently, staring at the surf alone as Kate sits down next to him. She wants to tell him how she became a fugitive, but Jack says that he doesn't want to know. Now that they're on this island, far away from home, he believes that everyone should be allowed to start over. In a flashback from an airport in Australia, Locke is prepared for his walkabout. However, the guide refuses to allow Locke admittance because Locke is actually paralyzed below his waist and had neglected to mention. Locke states that he can do this, but the guide bluntly says, "No, you can't," before leaving. As the bus departs for the walkabout, Locke shouts out the window to never tell him what he can't do. In the aftermath of the Oceanic Flight 815 crash, Locke wakes up on the beach, surrounded by screams. However, his attention is soon drawn to his feet as his toes wiggle. He realizes he is no longer paralyzed. Getting to his feet, he is called on for help by Jack to free another survivor. Back in the present, at night on the beach, rustling and roars are heard emanating from the fuselage. Jack moves to investigate with the rest of the group, but the creatures inside begin to move towards them, and the group runs for their lives. With the whole camp flustered, Locke steps forward to provide an explanation. The creatures are in fact wild boars. Still a little shaken, some of the survivors discuss the situation in the fuselage. The remains of the dead are rotting in the sun, not to mention attracting wildlife. Jack puts forward the harsh truth that the bodies should be burnt, much to the dismay of Sayid, who points out that this act would show no regard to the individual's wishes or beliefs about death. Jack, however, is undeterred. He states that the fuselage itself will be burned at sundown the next day, which will also provide a strong signal fire that night for possible rescue. In the morning, Kate finds Sayid, who is working on trying to make antennas to triangulate the distress signal that they heard previously. Meanwhile, the group realizes that they have exhausted all of the food from the plane and face the prospect of starvation. Locke stands up, suggesting that they hunt the boars that attack them. With the help of two others, he plans to kill the piglets, which would provide food and allow the mother to continue living to possibly breed more in future. As Jack and the rest of the group agree, Locke reveals the case he checked in when boarding the plane, which is full of hunting knives. Kate prepares to join the hunting mission, and Jack asks her why she is always so willing to sign up for outings into the jungle. She reveals that Sayid had given her an antenna to try to isolate the distress signal, which she is going to use when further inland. Michael is also gearing up for the trek and asks Son to watch Walt. Despite not speaking English, she understands quickly what Michael is asking and agrees to look after him. Walt objects to not being included, but Michael tells him that this is an opportunity to get to know Locke better. Elsewhere, Boone speaks to Shannon about Rose, a woman who lost her husband in the crash. She sits staring out at the water all day, and Boone is worried that she is suffering from some kind of shock. Shannon shows little interest, however, and the two argue about her not caring about others, despite the fact that she is relying on them for food. Shannon says that she can look after herself, and Boone smirks at the idea that she could catch fish for herself. Soon after, Shannon finds Charlie in the jungle and uses her charm to make him try to catch a fish for her. Meanwhile, Boone asks Jack to speak to Rose, on account of him being the man who saved her life after the crash. He reluctantly obliges, but Rose gives him no reply as he tries to chat with her. In the jungle, Locke tracks the boar's movements while Michael explains to Kate that Walt lived with his mother until her death 2 weeks ago. He and Walt had very little contact prior. They suddenly happen upon one of the boars, but when Michael speaks loudly as Kate and Locke silently approach, the mother boar charges at them in fear. This leaves Michael injured, and Locke also winded. While Kate tends to Michael, Locke says that he will find the boar alone, and states, "Don't tell me what I can't do," when Kate doubts him. Charlie and Hurley try to catch fish with a stick to little avail, as the tides throw them back. Meanwhile, Claire finds Sayid, giving him a letter she found with his name on it. Inside are photos of a young woman. Up the shore, Rose finally begins talking to Jack, and he reveals amongst other things that he only became a doctor as a result of medicine being the family business. As Kate and Michael head back, she climbs up a tree to attach the antenna. However, before she can finish, she hears the sounds of the monster, causing her to drop and break the equipment. The monster heads straight for Locke, who stares straight at it. On the other hand, Sawyer offers Claire some diaries and documents he found previously, and Michael arrives back at camp with Kate. Charlie also arrives back from his own hunt, giving Shannon a fish he eventually managed to kill. Boone and Shannon argue once more about her using people to get her own way, and Charlie realizes that she used him. Elsewhere, Jack and Rose move from their spot back to the camp to prepare for the memorial. He comments that she could say something about her husband, but he is shocked to hear Rose claim that she believes those in the tail section survived. Suddenly, Jack sees a man in a suit standing by the trees and is shocked into silence. On second glance, however, the figure is gone, and a confused Jack follows Rose back to camp. Kate returns the broken antenna to Sayid, with the resolve that they will try again until they succeed. Jack arrives, and Kate reveals that Locke was right in the monster's path and probably did not make it. However, Jack once again sees the man in a suit and runs into the jungle, with Kate at his heels. Instead of the figure, however, they find Locke, who brings with him a dead boar. In the final scene, at sundown, Claire reads off the names of the dead, giving brief bits of trivial information she managed to glean from the documents in the wreckage. The only survivor not attending is Jack, who sits away from the service looking out at the sea. Michael appreciates Locke for hunting the boar and then asks Locke about the monster, but Locke says that he did not see anything. If you want the part 2 and more daily movie recap, there are 3 things you need to do. 1. Like this video. 2. Share this video with others. 3. Subscribe to the channel and smash the notifications bell so you'll be notified as soon as a new video drops. Until next time, keep grinding, and I'll see you at the top.